Well, Matt, it's been quite the week so far.
Has.
Yeah.
And we're back for another election podcast, but
just not our election.
Just not the UK election,
Yeah.
because I think it's fair to say that the world's eyes have been turned towards America since Saturday evening, when the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, was shot at in Pennsylvania at a rally. And that, horrible event in which someone died has kind of focused and refocused an already fraught presidential race. And as we speak, the delegates at the Republicans' convention are meeting in Milwaukee.
It's an amazing couple of days.
It is. And, as we were getting ready for this podcast, there came through the news that in the Florida case, one of the many indictments against Trump, the judge Eileen Cannon, who is a Trump appointee, has dismissed the whole case.
Yeah.
So, just to stay momentarily on the legal stuff, he's pretty much got a free run now. He's the sentencing in the New York hush money case, where he was convicted on 34 counts, has been delayed indefinitely. The Georgia racketeering case, which was the strongest, has been delayed in limbo and certainly won't, I think, start this side of the election.
Yeah.
And now the grounds on which the judge in Florida this was the unauthorized removal of classified documents, and they'd ended up in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
It's all about the way in which the special counsel Jack Smith was appointed. Very, very arcane issue. And that may imperil Jack Smith's indictment of Trump over January the 6th, which is already suspended because of all the presidential immunity stuff coming out of the Supreme Court. The executive summary of which is that I don't think any of the indictments are going to lead to anything significant this side of the election.
And we should just remind people that this particular indictment was the one that people felt was a pretty much slam dunk.
It was very strong.
Because Trump is, his own lawyer has said that Trump had said, would it be better if we just told people there was nothing there? That we would. So the fact that he was concealing this stuff is beyond doubt. And like you say, I sent you a message earlier saying, the next thing we'll hear is he's won the Euro Millions. It's like
without entering.
He's had the most astonishing week, and we mustn't, we can go through all the stuff about we condemn political violence and all of this stuff, and we do, of course we do. And most importantly, we should remember that an innocent guy died trying to protect his family.
And also that Trump didn't die.
And Trump didn't die.
We are not in the business, on our side of the fence at least, of hoping that our political opponents die.
Of course not.
And that's a very big thing. And I think that it needs to be said again and again.
Yeah.
Because then one can proceed to a much broader discussion about the language of political violence, why this very toxic atmosphere has arisen, not just in America, but particularly in America, and particularly in this presidential election. And what's going on, because there is a very dangerous feeling, I think, now to this election. Not as dangerous as it would have been if Trump had been killed on Saturday. God knows where we'd be.
Jeez, it's
beyond
comprehension. But the blame game started very early. Didn't it
started immediately, actually.
So we've had Nigel Farage, who's rushed from his Clacton constituency to be at the president's side, saying. His pinned tweet, which has had, last time I looked, 20,000 retweets, saying the mainstream media have created this...
The narrative put out there about Trump by these liberals that oppose him is so nasty, it almost encourages this type of behaviour.
Yeah. Disgusting people.
Disgusting, yeah.
So he's blaming the mainstream media and liberals in general. You've got J.D. Vance, who may
in the course of this hour or later...
in the next hour be announced as Trump's vice president.
He's certainly one of the final three.
Blaming Joe Biden. Directly blaming Joe Biden.
He says Biden's campaign's rhetoric, I'm quoting here, led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination.
Yeah.
And then there's even worse, a Republican congressman from Georgia called Mike Collins.
That's right.
Who said on X that, quote, Joe Biden sent the orders.
Yeah.
Calling for the local district attorney to lay charges for attempted assassination against President Biden. Now, this is really absurd, but it's also incredibly dangerous, because what it implies, it doesn't imply, it says it, is that what happened on Saturday, and we don't know the motives, if indeed there are any, of this guy that tried to kill Trump.
Yeah.
But the argument being made by very senior people in the Republican Party is that this is the direct consequence, they've been very clear, of what they call the hysterical rhetoric of the Democrats. And what is that hysterical rhetoric? Well, they say that by naming Trump as a threat to democracy, which he absolutely is, and by saying that he has fascistic tendencies, which he certainly does, they are imperiling his life, which is a huge non sequitur.
I mean, the most bizarre overreach in this regard is when Biden said last week, we've got to put Trump in a bullseye.
Yeah.
Meaning, quite clearly, metaphorically,
of course,
we have to put him under the spotlight. We have to scrutinize him completely. And you've had people today coming out saying this is an incitement to assassination. It's insane.
It's ridiculous and also, again, dangerous, because metaphor is at the very heart of politics. I mean, political language is and has always been bellicose. This is not a product of the social media age. I mean, it's just sort of drawing up a list, battleground states, punching up and down, punching the bruise, the war room, bullet points, killer lines. William F. Buckley, the absolute epitome of genteel republicanism, had a long-running show called Firing Line.
That's right.
CNN had a show that had a very young Tucker Carlson on it called Crossfire.
Well, Ian Dale's on LBC's got a show called Crossfire.
Right. I mean, none of these
are these people all
inciting people to violence. Of course they're not.
It's madness.
And
we've got a massive metaphor on our front page this week, written by yourself. Which, when you sent me the line, I thought instantly that's a great summary of what's just happened. And the line is, the bullet hit Trump, but it killed Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden, the one thing we know about this story is that Joe Biden's alive, right?
Yeah.
So anybody who thinks that is us literally saying that he's been killed.
The bullet flew
from
Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C.
So, but we've already
Delaware,
on Twitter, I've seen people saying, oh, this is horribly violent language. No, it's a story about a guy trying to shoot a former president of the United States. It's a story about an overtly violent act.
Yes.
I'm sorry, we don't tap dance around this stuff.
No. And also, the essence of writing is often to shift back and forth between the literal and the metaphorical.
Yeah.
And in a civilized democracy, people are capable of seeing the difference.
Yeah. And let's talk about the difference between what Joe Biden said about Donald Trump and the bullseye, and the literal, which is what Donald Trump has said in the past.
Where do you want to start?
Yeah.
I mean, let's go back a little way. In 2020, during the debate, actually we can go back further, but this is a good example. During the debates, when the Proud Boys and other right-wing militias were threatening action of one sort or another, Trump said, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, which was like a military command. He said on January the 6th, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country's had enough. We will not take it anymore. Also in 2020, going back, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, 2017. When you see, this is at a rally, when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in rough, I said. Please don't be too nice. Iowa, 2016. If you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously, okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you I'll pay for the legal fees. I promise. On and on and on.
When they said about Mike Pence in the aftermath of the insurrection, they said, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. Trump said, maybe they should, maybe he deserves it.
Yeah.
Now, there's no metaphor
That's
there.
not metaphorical.
When he says beat up the protesters, that's literal.
No,
it's
that's
an
literal.
instruction.
It's an instruction.
When he says you can grab women by the pussy, he's not making some sort of fancy, nuanced metaphor. He's talking about sexual assault.
Trump
this
is not
guy
a master
is
of the metaphor.
A guy grounded in violence.
Yes.
And the subsequent sanctification of him has been something to behold. And I'll tell you, I'll pass the baton over in a second for the rage. But the big mistake I think that I've seen in the setting of the mood music was Joe Biden referring to him as Donald.
Yes.
In his address, and I thought
well-intentioned.
Well-intentioned. I understand why.
But a big mistake.
He is not suddenly the nice guy from next door. He is still the nasty. Proto-fascist that could absolutely destroy democracy in the US.
It is completely consistent to say that you are very relieved and pleased as a decent human being that the man wasn't shot dead on Saturday.
Yeah.
And also to say that you are appalled by his ideas, his lack of morality, his ethics, and more to the point, his plans for the second term, if he gets it, which are horrific, autocratic, misogynistic, xenophobic, and on the global stage would wreck potentially NATO, our plans for climate change collaboration, the war in Ukraine.
Involve the expulsion of literally millions of Americans who don't have their right papers.
It can't be said often enough, this plan he has to deport undocumented migrants is not a border policy, it's a community policy. He's going to take individual undocumented immigrants out of their homes and deport them.
Yeah.
And if necessary, he has said he will deploy the National Guard.
Yeah.
Now that is, the basis of major social disorder, and that leads to emergency powers, which are generally not, do not end.
So some of the pushback we've had about the front page already, it's not out till Wednesday, but we put it up on Twitter today, is the explicit sentiment that Joe Biden is absolutely done and dusted in this race.
Yeah.
And we thought that before this.
We did.
But we think in my mind, it is beyond naive to think that Joe Biden is going to come and win a second term.
I mean, the desperation of the Democratic ecosphere in America is such that there was some spinning on late on Saturday night, and certainly on Sunday and early Monday from that part of the world, that this was good for Biden because it would end all the speculation about his frailty and infirmity and unsuitability to be the president. So, shame about Trump's ear, but actually it gave Biden a breathing space. Now, first of all, I don't think for a minute, I think there might be a pause in the speculation, at least publicly, about Biden's fitness to run. But the idea that this is going to, stop it is absurd.
Yeah.
And if anything, it's just postponed the moment of reckoning, if there is one, which is a bad thing. But I think that the other thing to bear in mind is that one of the things that we were always concerned about when we talked about this on the pod was that, as horrific as Trump is, he has about him a sort of bizarre, ageless virility and masculinity. It's horrible to behold.
What's the great quote? Wrong and strong?
Yes. Bill Clinton said that America prefers strong and wrong to weak and right.
Yeah.
And as I said in the piece, you very kindly mentioned, there is to a much greater extent than in European, or at least most European polities, American democracy is very patriarchal, very masculine, very geared towards virility and strength. And one has to hand it to Trump that at the moment when he realized he'd been shot, he hit the deck, and then he's all instinct. Trump, he doesn't calculate, he doesn't weigh up the evidence. He's the absolute opposite of Obama in that respect.
Yeah.
He just acts on instinct, and his showbiz instinct told him this is a moment. And so it's incredible to watch, and we've all watched it countless times now. He's covered by really alarmed, and rightly so, Secret Service agents. There's a sort of sea of black jackets and dark glasses over him. And this is a 78-year-old man, probably weighs about 350, I don't know, not athletic, okay? And he bursts out of this sort of tortoise of protection to raise his fist in defiance and shout, "Fight, fight, fight."
Yeah.
And he knows he's got the second shot, which is a photographic shot. And indeed, I think Evan Ritchie is his name.
Ritchie from Associated Press. Yeah.
Took this picture, which will now go down the ages as one of the great whatever happens now will go as one of the great iconic pictures of US photojournalism, and it's an incredible image.
Yeah.
It's perfectly composed. Everything about it is perfect.
It's got that smell of Iwo Jima.
It's sort of I said it, Iwo Jima meets MAGA. It's got that. It's got the flag. It's beautifully composed. You get the bloodied face, the expression. And
if they choreographed that, they couldn't have done it better.
And of course, by the way, there's this is really a sidebar to the main story, but there's a a sometimes comical phenomenon which has been nicknamed Blue Anon, which is the sort of crazy left-wing version of QAnon, which is people on the far left who just go berserk over everything.
Yeah.
And they, within minutes, literally, of Trump being shot, were the hashtag staged was trending on X.
That's right.
Because they were all saying it's obviously been staged.
Yeah.
The Secret Service were in on it. There's no way he would have got this close without it all being organised. It's choreographed. There's a movie called Bob Roberts with Tim Robbins in it, where a Republican senatorial candidate is fake shot.
Right.
And it was all hashtag Bob Roberts, hashtag Bob Roberts. Now you have to be really a political nerd to remember that movie. It was a great movie, but I mean, I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't necessarily say to listeners, rush off and watch it. It's good. It's a good movie, but it's like the speed with which it became a thing. It was very funny. But so we've gone full Dealey Plaza on that, and that sort of, I don't want to imply any moral equivalence with the sort of things that JD Vance and co are saying, but it has added to the temperature a bit.
Yeah, of course. And one other striking aspect which I think is starting to be diagnosed a little bit, but perhaps got looked over in the immediate aftermath of when he said it, was that Trump said, "God alone saved me."
Yes.
And when I first heard that, I thought, well, that's just him talking to...
Just like, for God's sake.
Or whatever. And then I thought, Trump is precisely the kind of narcissist who might actually start believing in divine intervention.
Do you remember last year we played a clip from one of the pro-Trump campaigns about God gave us Trump? And then we talked about how he's built up this base in the evangelical Christian community. And there's no doubt that he's high on his own supply now. I mean, he does think that he's said in several interviews now since the shooting that, God saved him, and this is further evidence of him being the chosen one.
But there's a great potential.
Oh yeah,
that he literally believes that.
I'm sure that, having cynically embraced the narrative at the start, way back in 2015, when he first started cutting deals with the evangelicals, who really wanted Roe v. Wade to be overturned, and they've got what they wanted. I don't think he thought about it for a moment as being real. I think he's now come to see it as, whether he believes in it in a sort of traditionally Christian sense, I don't know. But he certainly has come to believe in himself as in some way supernaturally aided.
Yes, that the destiny is...
There's a destiny. He's
destiny,
a mythological figure.
Yeah.
And I think that the danger this week in Milwaukee at the Republican convention is that this assassination attempt is the sort of capstone to a narrative he's been plugging away at for well over a year and a half now, which is that he's the victim, ever since the indictment started, he's the victim of persecution. He's a vicarious victim too, because they're persecuting him so they can get you, the voters.
It's the suffering of Christ.
It's the suffering of Christ. And I think that this was always going to be an angry convention. It's full MAGA. There are so many. The list of Trump family members who are speaking is incredible.
Right.
It's a dynastic Trump MAGA event. It's not the Republican Party that we grew up with at all. And it was always going to be simple and angry and about retribution and revenge. But now there's going to be this strange, rather creepy extra dimension to it of sort of transfiguration that Trump has now been elevated to the saved and the savior.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of speculation about whether... I mean, I'm reading the American newspapers this morning about whether he's serious, because he says he's rewritten his big speech for Thursday and he's going to make a unity call and all this. And I am sure, by the way, that he will, at some stage this week, say something "we are the world" like, and call for unity. But Trump is nothing if not contradictory, and it's well within his capabilities in a speech to call for unity and then call all his enemies,
for their heads,
and he call for their heads and say there should be. I mean, he has called for public executions. He has called for shoplifters to be shot on sight. He did ask his defense secretary why rioters couldn't be shot in the legs by army personnel. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we're going to see a sudden change of character.
Well, look, hold that thought. Let's have a very quick break and come back to how we think things might play out the way Trump will play it, and also what the consequences are for Biden. So, Matt, as we were saying just before the break, Trump is smart enough to know that the best way he can play this now is it's almost like he has had a reset opportunity in terms of the public's perception of him. And there'll be a lot of people who were ambivalent or undecided and who will look at Trump and think, okay, you're strong, and I get that you're a unity guy. Now you want to bring people. You've changed. You've changed. I don't believe Trump is capable of that kind of profound change.
Of course not.
But of course, the risk is that a lot of people will look at him and think, okay, I'm going to give you.
They'll see they'll see the ready brek aura around him.
Exactly.
And draw those conclusions.
Yeah.
And I think that, look, on the polling, the Times, London Times, not New York Times, just released some YouGov polling in 7 key swing states, and this is before the shooting, and he has moved ahead in all of them.
Yeah.
So that was before the shooting, and then someone we've spoken about briefly on the pod, I think, before, a guy called Frank Luntz, who's a very eminent pollster and a focus group facilitator from the US. He's been doing a lot of media, and I overheard him this afternoon. What he was saying was very interesting. He said he didn't think that the shooting would sort of lead to a sudden uptick in the national share of the vote. But what he thought it would really do, and I thought this was a very interesting way of looking at it, is it would turn all Trump supporters into Trump voters. And of course, what Democrats rely upon is that a lot of their voters, university educated or professional people or media people, are high propensity voters, i.e. they go out and vote.
Yeah.
Republicans, on the other hand, especially as they've shifted to the disenfranchised, the left behind, have people who support Trump but don't necessarily go and vote for him. And Frank Luntz's point was, this event, because it's so mythic, it has such cut through, people will get into their pickups, even if it's a terrible wintry day on November the 5th. People will remember this. They'll remember Trump and his fist and his defiance and his urge to fight, and they'll go to the polling stations. And Frank, who often gets it right for what it's worth, said he thought this might be the moment that Trump won the election.
And the reason that there are many reasons why that kind of swing in vote is important, but the way that American presidential campaigns work is that they have these huge resources of money, but they have to be very strategic about where they spend the money. Now, in New York, right, where Joe Biden could expect to hold it comfortably, it's now very close. And that
Which is crazy.
The Democrats now have to spend campaign funds in New York to make sure. So everything gets spread thin, and it means in the states like Wisconsin, where they need to turn over,
and Georgia and Arizona and Pennsylvania,
where they absolutely have to carry on with this, what they call the path to the presidency, to the White House, so that, in other words, there is a viable route to actually winning the presidency. They haven't got as much money to spend.
No,
and Trump can spend his way.
And every time one of these things happen, every time adversarial things happen to Trump, the indictments, and I'm sure he gets a sudden influx of cash, which is, again, another example of how I think we're going to have to rethink all the political rules, because the indictments ought to have been the end of him, and they were actually what launched him as a plausible and then certain candidate for the nomination in 2024, which is very odd and has yet to be fully understood. But you mentioned, Matt, the donors. Well, I think that's a nice sort of segue, as we've learned to say, into Biden again. Yeah. Because one of the things before the assassination attempt Biden was having trouble with already was donors who were ringing up and saying, we're not throwing millions of dollars after a losing cause. Yeah. And this is rather like, this happens in all democracies where parties aren't state funded. People back winners. And Biden is, after the last terrible fortnight plus since the debate in Atlanta, CNN debate on June the 27th, Biden has been on a kind of almost like a spiral of doom. Yeah. Everything he tries to do just gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And, last time we discussed this, we were, appalled that he was going to do what was billed as a big boy press conference at NATO. And it was okay, but...
but there were within the first minute, he's called Kamala Harris
Vice President Trump. And earlier in the day, he'd introduced Vladimir Zelensky as Putin. Yeah. And I think that things like that, which might have been ignored or passed over a year ago, are now leapt upon because they confirm a narrative that is now really the narrative for Biden. Yeah. I don't think that this changes the argument about Biden at all.
Well, I think it makes it worse.
It
just puts everything in relief. It's kind of, to give the listeners a glimpse of what things were going to be in the New European this week before the assassination attempt. We were going to do a piece saying that Joe Biden is the most dangerous man in America because of his bullish stubbornness about not accepting the reality that he cannot win. Now, obviously, that headline was thrown out.
Things have moved on.
Things, and boy, have they moved on.
Yeah.
And in no way does it help Biden. I don't see where anybody's saying, it's 3 months to go. Well, there's all the only thing it does, I think, in helping Biden is I do think it gives him a week or two of respite while Trump is the dominant story. But everyone will double down on his unfitness.
Look, the minute the Milwaukee convention ends, we resume with the Biden. Yeah. I mean, by the weekend, it'll be back to that. Yeah. And time is incredibly short. I mean, I'm really frustrated by hearing, as I'm sure you are, pundits on the sort of Democrat-leaning side saying the next 2 or 3 days will be crucial. They've been saying that since June the 27th, and nothing has changed. It's got worse. So the question is, are they basically going to hand the election on a plate to Donald Trump? It may already be on his plate.
Yeah.
Or are they going to try, the least worst option, which is Biden steps aside and there is a blitz primary, as it's being called, of the various potential contenders, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, who's governor in Michigan, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Pete Buttigieg, the Transportation Secretary, Gavin Newsom from California. There's a list that writes itself, potentials, and they have a very it's a thing to which parties are no longer habituated, which is a live conference, and it could be complete disaster.
Yeah,
but it is at least it's a shot. It's a shot,
How dare you use that inflammatory language? Stop
exactly.
Inciting.
But what it represents is it would show the democratic community to be alive and vivid and in the service of the American people and the wider world, because what happens in this election will affect everyone on the planet.
Yeah,
it really will, and giving the Democrat Party the chance to choose a nominee with a chance of beating Trump is something which everyone in the world has an interest in, apart from Vladimir Putin.
It is, and not to do so is just complacency of a whole new order.
It's the worst aspect of that kind of politics, which is, look, he's been a great president. Yes, but this is not about who's been a great president. This is about who can be a president until January the 20th, 2029, which even makes me, I think that's long. I'll be about to turn 61, right? Yeah. Which I don't say with any pleasure, right? But I will be. Now, Biden will be about 160 by then. Yeah. So come on, guys. And I think here's the funny thing about it all is that I would never accuse Biden of being like Trump, because he isn't. He's a great American and he's done amazing things in his career. But he's starting to show Trump-adjacent behavioural habits. I mean, basically, there's hubris, there's hyperbole, talking about running the world, and worst of all, there's alternative facts, to use that phrase that Kellyanne Conway made popular in 2016 or 17, I think it's 2017, Trump's then advisor. The Democratic Party is now running on alternative facts. It is deluding itself publicly that this man can beat Donald Trump in the election and can go on to become a decent second-term president. It's an insulting.
It's madness.
Delusion.
It's madness.
And the fact they're paralysed is no excuse. Sorry, that's your job.
Talk about, because you have great historical knowledge on this topic. 1968. We've mentioned it in the past, but last time we mentioned 1968, we were just alluding to conference chaos, convention chaos.
Yeah.
But with this assassination attempt,
yes,
it's now brought the analogy even closer, hasn't it?
Has, yeah.
68, you see Martin Luther King assassinated. You see Bobby Kennedy assassinated. You see Lyndon Johnson stepping down.
Yes.
In some part because of protests over
Vietnam,
the
and partly
War.
because he was, Eugene McCarthy did well in the New Hampshire primary.
Right.
And Lyndon Johnson thought this is not going to go well, and he correctly guessed that Robert Kennedy would jump into the race, which he did.
Yeah.
And he took this extraordinary decision. But actually, in some respects, a very statesmanlike decision, because he knew that he was tarred with the brush of Vietnam. And in the end, Hubert Humphrey, his vice president, went on to be the candidate and was roundly beaten by Nixon.
Yes.
So it didn't work.
So you have a incredibly febrile atmosphere.
Yes.
Which I think, this is the year before I was born. You were a little you were a baby.
I wasn't there.
And we thought, do you remember Barack Obama talking about, what was it, the unending arc of...
The arc of... Well, he was borrowing from Martin Luther King, who had borrowed from someone else.
Yeah.
The arc of universe is long, but it bends towards progress.
Right, okay, so let's just question that.
Well, I don't believe it does.
Is it bending towards progress, or is it just wrapping round in a bloody circle?
No, I mean, one of the things that I've come to believe in the sort of post-2016 world is that with respect to Martin Luther King, who was a giant of a man, there isn't actually an arc of the moral. There is just what people do and human agency. But I think the 1968 precedent that you mentioned, Matt, is very, very important, because Democrats are very superstitious, and 68 was basically a nervous breakdown for them, and they have never quite, they have recovered from it, but they remember it in their folklore. So the idea of a sitting president, and Lyndon Johnson's quite similar. I mean, he's much gruffer than Biden, but he was a person who was a very good legislator.
Yes. And a tough guy.
Tougher than Biden, but
he was Texan, right?
Yeah, very much so. And so him standing down and the consequences is not a happy precedent for them.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, at both conventions, huge protests and problems. The Democrats in Chicago, the Republicans in Miami. Now, since then, conventions have become much, much, much higher security, and there have been all sorts of measures taken in Milwaukee, I think, buttressed since Saturday, to make sure that security is tight.
Yeah.
But of course, you'd have to be incredibly unimaginative not to be thinking, wow, what happens now? What if there are protests? What if they could get through the Secret Service cordon at a rally in Pennsylvania? What if there's a mob at Milwaukee? And more to the point, what if there's a mob at Chicago in August? Because Biden has made many enemies as president, as well as achieving great things, particularly on the issue of Gaza and other things like that. So, all this makes Democrats incredibly nervous. The mention of 1968 just gives them the heebie-jeebies.
But they should have the heebie-jeebies, shouldn't they? Because this is as close as they've come since.
They should have nothing but the heebie-jeebies, because it's too early to say whether this will be. Some people say this, if Trump wins, this will be the last American election. Right? I'm not sure, but what is certain is that Trump this time means business, and we've mentioned it before, and we'll mention it again. The Project 2025 team has put together, as a group of think tanks and sympathetic Trumpites, have put together a 900-page document full, which makes clear what they're going to do. I mean, it's all in there, including the immigration plan we mentioned earlier.
It's a dummy's guide to autocracy, basically.
It is exactly that, and it's 900 pages. And the guy who's really been overseeing it, very key to the MAGA movement, Kevin Roberts, said, that this is a second American Revolution, which can be bloodless if the American left let it be.
Yeah.
Which is as clear
As chilling as you could.
I mean, that's not ambiguous, and it's not.
Have a go.
And it's not metaphorical.
Yes, no, exactly. So
to
again,
go full circle, you know,
all of these. Let's lower the temperature. Yes, please, let's lower the temperature. But the greatest mistake I think liberals could make right now is thinking that there's any sincerity on the behalf of Donald Trump and his followers when they say it's time to unite and it's time.
Yeah, no, of course
they don't mean
that.
Fucking word of it.
Of course they don't. And the Democrats have a tendency to agonize over the small stuff. So I was listening to an episode of Pod Save America the other day, which I always enjoy. But there'd been this allegation, we mentioned last week, George Clooney, the Hollywood star and major Democratic donor, wrote a piece in the New York Times saying it was time for Biden to step aside.
Yeah.
And there was this conspiracy theory that John Favreau, who was Barack Obama's speechwriter and is now a big podcaster on Pod Save America, had ghostwritten the piece for Clooney, and that it had been signed off by Barack Obama.
Right.
And Favreau was saying, no, it's all rubbish, I don't care.
Yeah.
At this stage in the game, I have zero interest in either who wrote it or whether Barack Obama said it was okay.
Yeah.
What worries me is the idea that a 350-pound orange man with deeply fascistic tendencies is about to get a second term in the White House.
Which I might believe that Jesus gave it to him.
And that will have impact on all of us. Absolutely every one of us. So, it's kind of like, don't sweat the small stuff, guys, when you've got a real problem on your hands.
And don't call this tosser Donald.
Don't call him Donald. Call him a felon.
Yeah,
call him a convicted felon,
and a danger to democracy.
And a convicted rapist.
Yeah. Right. Thank you for bearing with us as we vented, folks.
Doom scrolling our way through reality.
There'll be more of it to come, I'm sure. Get any feedback, especially interested to hear from listeners in the States, of which we have a surprisingly large number.
Tell us what you think. Tell us what's going on.
Tell us if we're getting this hopelessly wrong. Are we panicking?
What's happening on the ground?
Tell us how we should be thinking. Send in your feedback, questions to 2matts@tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2, MATTS @tnepublishing.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the New European. Every week we produce what many people think is a brilliant newspaper, and I'm one of those people. And and you can have it through your door for £2 a week.
Nothing.
You can't even get yourself a coffee. We used to say that's the price of a coffee. It's not. It's half the price of a bloody coffee. Anyway, if you think independent journalism is worth half the price of a bloody takeaway coffee, then please do subscribe. And we'll give you a £25 gift voucher as a thank you to spend at the New European shop. So can't really say fairer than that. Thank you, as always, to our team at Rethink Audio, led by Ollie Peart and assisted by Matt Hill.
And we'll see you next week.
We'll see you on Friday.
We'll see you on Friday.
We'll see you on Friday for our regular podcast. Have a great week, folks.
Have a great week.